A car door slammed across the street. Another neighbor, an older man in a gray hoodie, had stepped outside. He looked back and forth between James and Karen, his face unreadable. James met his eyes, silently wondering if he, too, was about to make some snap judgment. But after a moment, the man just shook his head and walked back inside. James didn't know if that meant he didn't want to get involved, or if he had seen this kind of thing happen before. The sirens were close now. Blue and red lights flickered in the distance, reflecting off the nearby windows. Karen straightened her posture, standing tall like she was about to be rewarded for her good deed. James swallowed hard. This was really happening. James took another steadying breath as the flashing lights bounced off his windshield. The police car rolled to a stop at the curb, and within seconds, 2 officers stepped out. Karen waved them down, already talking before they could even assess the situation. "Thank God you're here. I caught him trying to steal that car," she blurted out, pointing directly at James. "He refuses to leave. He's just sitting there like he owns the place." James shook his head slowly, his frustration rising. He forced himself to stay calm as the officers exchanged a glance before approaching his car. One tapped on the driver's side window. James rolled it down, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," he said, his voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" The officer, a tall man with a serious expression, studied him. "We got a report about a stolen vehicle. Can you step out of the car, sir?" James hesitated. "This is my car," he said plainly. "I just bought it. I live here." He motioned toward the house. Karen scoffed from behind the officers. "Oh, come on. He's obviously lying." She folded her arms. People like him don't just buy brand new cars like that. James clenched his jaw but didn't take the bait. Instead, he reached toward the glove compartment. "I have the paperwork right here," he said. The second officer, a woman, stepped closer. "Move slow," she instructed. James nodded and carefully pulled out the registration papers, along with his driver's license. He handed them over. The officer studied them for a moment, glancing at the address listed. She turned and looked at the house, then back at him. "This is your name?" she asked. James nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The officer stepped away for a moment, talking quietly. Karen, still standing there, looked increasingly frustrated. She glanced between them and James, clearly waiting for them to put him in handcuffs. But James could see the shift happening. The officers weren't rushing to arrest him. They were actually checking the facts. While they talked, another car pulled into the driveway. It was James' best friend, Marcus, who had come by to celebrate the move. He stepped out, taking in the flashing lights and tense standoff. "You, James, what's going on?" Before James could answer, Karen gasped dramatically. "Oh, great, now there's 2 of them," she exclaimed, stepping back like Marcus was some kind of threat. Marcus frowned. "2 of who?" He looked at James. What is she talking about? James let out a slow breath. "She called the cops on me. Said I stole my own car." Marcus' face darkened. He turned toward Karen. "You serious right now?" Before she could answer, the officers returned. The male officer looked at Karen, his tone more neutral now. "Ma'am, his registration checks out. This is his car. And according to his license, this is his home." Karen blinked. No, that can't be right." She shook her head, laughing nervously. "Maybe he faked the documents. Or maybe he stole the car and the ID." James exhaled sharply. "Wow." Marcus muttered under his breath. "Unbelievable." The female officer shot Karen a sharp look. "Ma'am, do you have any actual proof of a crime here? Or did you just assume?" Karen opened her mouth. then closed it. She wasn't expecting pushback. James could see it now, the wheels turning in her head. She had expected the officers to side with her immediately, to drag him out of the car without question. But things weren't going the way she had planned. Still, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Karen's face twisted in frustration as she realized the officers weren't immediately taking her side. She opened her mouth, then hesitated, looking at the cops like she was trying to figure out a new angle. "There's got to be a mistake," she insisted, her voice higher now, more desperate. "I know everyone in this neighborhood. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen him before. I'm telling you, something isn't right." The female officer crossed her arms. "Ma'am, moving into a new neighborhood isn't a crime. It was supposed to be an exciting day, a fresh start." James had just pulled into the driveway of his new home, the keys to his brand new car still warm in his hands. He had worked hard for this moment, saving up, putting in the long hours, and finally treating himself to something nice. But before he could even step out of the car, something felt off. He noticed the blinds twitching from the house across the street, and within minutes, a woman stormed out onto her porch, phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her name was Karen, and the moment she laid eyes on James, her face twisted with suspicion. She wasn't interested in welcoming a new neighbor. Instead, she immediately jumped to the worst conclusion possible, assuming he had stolen the very car he had worked so hard for. James, still sitting behind the wheel, sighed as he saw her approaching. He had dealt with situations like this before, too many times. But today was different. Today, he was in front of his own home. This was supposed to be a place of comfort, not confrontation. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" Karen's voice was sharp, demanding. She stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, her expression screaming entitlement. James stayed calm. "I live here," he replied, gesturing toward the house. "Just moved in." But Karen wasn't having it. She scoffed, looking him up and down. "Nice try. That car doesn't belong to you. I saw you pull up, and I know you don't belong in this neighborhood." James clenched his jaw, trying to keep his frustration in check. He knew exactly where this was heading. And just as expected, Karen whipped out her phone and dialed 911 right in front of him. "Yes, I need the police immediately," she said, her voice dripping with fake urgency. "There's a suspicious man in my neighbor's driveway, and I think he stole a car." James closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He could already hear the sirens in his mind, already see the flashing lights. He knew how quickly things like this could escalate. And the worst part, he had done absolutely nothing wrong. As he watched Karen describe him to the dispatcher, exaggerating every detail to make him sound more threatening, he realized that this wasn't just about a car. This was about something much bigger. Something that, no matter how successful he became or how hard he worked, he would always have to deal with. And now, with the police on their way, James had to prepare himself for whatever came next. Would they believe him, or would they take Karen's side without question? Would they see him as a homeowner or as a suspect? The sirens began to wail in the distance. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. This wasn't over yet. James sat still in his car, his heart pounding in his chest as the distant sirens grew louder. He had done nothing wrong. He knew that, but that didn't change the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. He had seen how situations like this could spiral out of control. All it took was one officer making the wrong assumption, one moment of misunderstanding, and suddenly things could turn dangerous. Karen stood at the edge of the driveway, arms still crossed, tapping her foot impatiently like she had just caught a criminal in the act. Every few seconds, she glanced over at James, her expression smug, like she was proud of herself for doing the right thing. To her, she was a hero protecting her neighborhood. But James knew better. He took another deep breath, gripping the steering wheel as he thought about how to handle this. Maybe he should step out now, try to explain himself before the cops arrived. But then again, he had seen how that could go. Some people would never listen, no matter how calm or reasonable he was. Inside the house, James' phone buzzed. He had set it down on the passenger seat when he pulled up, too distracted by Karen's behavior to check it. He glanced at the screen, his sister Mia. She had been waiting to hear how the move went. He thought about answering, but what could he even say? "Hey, I'm home, but my neighbor thinks I'm a car thief." Instead, he let the call go to voicemail, his eyes flickering back to Karen. She was pacing now, still on the phone, throwing glances his way as she spoke. "Yes, he's still here," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "He won't leave." James exhaled sharply. Asterisk, asterisk, leave. Asterisk, asterisk, this was his home. He wasn't going anywhere. As he sat there, he thought back to all the work it had taken to get to this point. The late nights, the early mornings, the sacrifices. Growing up, he had always dreamed of owning a home like this, a place where he could finally breathe, where he could build something for himself. He had imagined this moment 100 times, pulling into the driveway, stepping into his new life. But in none of those dreams had he pictured this. As the last of the police vehicles pulled away, James stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything settle on him. The night had started with excitement, his first night in his new home. But it had ended with him having to prove he even belonged there. Marcus clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, man. Let's go inside." James nodded. He stepped into asterisk asterisk, his asterisk asterisk house, locking the door behind him. And for the first time that night, he finally let himself breathe. James leaned against the door for a moment, letting out a slow breath. The weight of the night pressed down on him, heavier than he expected. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter. But instead of celebrating his first night in his home, he had to defend his right to even be there. Marcus sat on the couch, shaking his head. "Man, I still can't believe that just happened." James let out a humorless chuckle. "Welcome to the neighborhood, right?" Marcus scoffed. "Some welcome." He hesitated, then looked at James. "You good?" James wanted to say yes. He wanted to brush it off like it didn't matter. But it did. "I don't know," he admitted. "I knew moving into a new place would come with challenges. I just didn't think asterisk asterisk, this asterisk asterisk would be one of them." Marcus nodded. It shouldn't have been. Silence hung between them for a moment. James' mind raced, replaying everything that had happened. The accusations, the way Karen refused to back down, the way the police had shown up, because asterisk asterisk she asterisk asterisk made the call. And then the way she walked away, humiliated but untouched by any real consequences. He clenched his jaw, then exhaled. "You know what the worst part is," he said finally. "She's still going to see herself as the victim in all this." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, people like that always do." James shook his head. "I don't want this to be what defines my time here. I don't want to live in a place where I'm constantly looking over my shoulder." "You shouldn't have to." Marcus leaned forward. "But listen, this is asterisk asterisk your asterisk asterisk house. Asterisk asterisk your asterisk asterisk home. Don't let one ignorant neighbor make you feel like you don't belong." James let the words sink in. He had worked hard for this house. He had earned it. He wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You expecting someone?" James shook his head and walked cautiously toward the door. He peeped through the peephole and sighed. It was Greg. James opened the door slowly, not sure what to expect. Greg stood there with an apologetic look on his face. "Hey," Greg said. "I just wanted to stop by and say, I'm really sorry about what happened tonight." James studied him for a moment. Greg sighed. "Karen's always been, well, asterisk asterisk, Karen asterisk asterisk, but what she did tonight, that was out of line. And I should have spoken up sooner." James appreciated the honesty. He nodded. "Yeah, you should have." Greg winced but nodded. "You're right." He hesitated, then said, "Look, not everyone in this neighborhood is like her. I just wanted you to know that. You asterisk asterisk do asterisk asterisk belong here." James looked at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thanks," he said. Greg offered a tight smile, then stepped back. "Welcome to the neighborhood, James." James closed the door and let out a slow breath. Maybe things wouldn't change overnight. Maybe Karen would still glare at him from across the street. But at least now he knew that not everyone saw it in the way she did. He turned to Marcus, who smirked. "Guess you've got at least one decent neighbor." James chuckled. "Guess so." He walked over to the window and looked outside. The street was quiet now, just like any other neighborhood at the end of the day. And for the first time since he arrived, it actually felt like home. Karen's hands clenched at her sides. She looked like she wanted to argue, but for the first time since this all started, she had nothing to say. James didn't take his eyes off her. She had spent the last half hour trying to convince everyone he didn't belong here. But now, she was the one looking out of place. And then, just as he thought this nightmare might finally be over, another voice rang out. A voice James hadn't heard before. "Excuse me, but what exactly is going on here?" Everyone turned again. A second police car had pulled up, and stepping out was a man in a suit. Not a cop. Someone asterisk asterisk, higher up asterisk asterisk. James' stomach twisted. This wasn't over. Not yet. The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes scanning the scene with sharp focus. His presence alone shifted the energy. He wasn't just another officer. There was authority in the way he carried himself. James felt his muscles tighten. Karen, sensing an opportunity, rushed toward him. "Sir, I'm so glad you're here." "I tried to tell them something wasn't right, but they wouldn't listen." "This man," she pointed at James, "claims he owns this house, but She shook her head dramatically. "I had to make sure." The man held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. He turned to the officers first. "Status." The female officer straightened. "We ran his registration and license. Everything checks out. He lives here." The man nodded slowly, then turned his gaze on Karen. His expression didn't change, but something about the way he looked at her made her shift uncomfortably. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice even. "You saw a man pull into his own driveway. A man who had the key to his own home. A man who provided ID, registration, and proof of address. And instead of apologizing, you called for backup." Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. James exhaled, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. He wanted this to be over. He wanted to go inside, lock the door, and breathe. But then the man in the suit turned to him. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing James directly. "I'm Chief Reynolds. I came because the dispatcher received an escalation request." James frowned. Escalation. Reynolds nodded, then looked at Karen. She called again after the first officers arrived, claimed they weren't taking her concerns seriously. James and Marcus exchanged a look. Karen had doubled down. Even after being proven wrong, she had refused to let it go. The weight of it settled in James' chest. This could have gone so much worse. If these officers had been different, If they had handled the situation another way, tonight could have ended in a nightmare. Karen, now fully realizing how deep she had buried herself, shook her head. I didn't mean to waste anyone's time. Reynolds' expression remained unreadable. Oh, you didn't just waste time, he said. You made a false report. Karen paled. False? No, I was just being cautious. I really thought. Reynolds sighed. Ma'am, being cautious is calling a non-emergency line to ask a question. What you did was accuse someone of a crime with asterisk asterisk 0 asterisk asterisk evidence. The officers behind him were silent, watching. James could see Karen's world shifting in real time. She had spent the whole night convinced she was in the right. But now, standing in front of a police chief who wasn't having any of it, she had nowhere to turn. Reynolds studied her for another moment. Do you realize that filing a false police report is a chargeable offense? Karen's eyes widened. What? James' breath caught. He hadn't expected that. Reynolds didn't break eye contact. You called emergency services multiple times, insisting a crime was happening when there was none. You escalated an unnecessary situation, putting this man in danger, and you wasted law enforcement resources. He let the words sink in. Now I could file charges against you. I could also let your homeowners association know how you treated your new neighbor. Karen swallowed hard. James didn't speak. He wasn't sure what he wanted to happen next. He just knew he wanted it to be over. Reynolds studied Karen for another long moment, then finally exhaled. I'm going to give you one chance to walk away, he said. But I highly suggest you reconsider how you treat the people in this neighborhood. Karen nodded quickly. She didn't say another word. She turned, her face flushed, and walked away so fast she nearly tripped over herself. The officers began to disperse, and Marcus let out a breath. Damn, he muttered under his breath. I did not see that coming. James didn't either. He looked at Reynolds. Thank you, he said quietly. Reynolds nodded. Take care, Mr. Carter. With that, he turned and headed back to his car. Karen's mouth tightened. She turned to James again, her eyes darting between him and the house. If you really live here, then prove it. Open the front door. James let out a short, humorless laugh. Are you serious? Marcus shook his head. She's got some nerve. James had already shown them his ID. His registration, everything they needed. He shouldn't have to prove anything to her asterisk. But as much as he hated this situation, he knew the reality. If he refused, it might only make things worse. Fine, he said, exhaling slowly. He stepped out of the car, his movements careful and deliberate. The officers stayed close, watching, but their hands were nowhere near their weapons now. That was some relief, at least. Marcus followed a few steps behind, his arms still crossed as if daring Karen to say something else. James pulled his house key from his pocket, walked up the short path, and slid it into the lock. The deadbolt turned smoothly, and the door swung open. Silence. For a second, nobody said anything. Karen's face paled, her certainty flickering like a candle in the wind. James turned back to her, satisfied. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at the officers, then back at James like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I must have misunderstood, she finally stammered. It's just, you have to understand, I was only trying to protect the neighborhood. We've had break-ins before, and I thought. James held up a hand. Don't. His voice was firm, but even. He wasn't going to let her spin this into some noble act. You didn't think. You assumed. Karen bristled. Well, how was I supposed to know? Marcus scoffed. I don't know, maybe by asterisk asterisk, not asterisk asterisk, jumping to conclusions. Maybe by not calling the cops the second you saw a black man in a nice car. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of everything hanging between them. The officers didn't say anything, just watching as Karen squirmed under the pressure of her own mistake. James shook his head, his frustration simmering just below the surface. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, asterisk asterisk, he asterisk asterisk was the one who had to prove himself. Asterisk asterisk, he asterisk asterisk was the one who had to unlock his own door to be believed. And worst of all, he knew this wouldn't be the last time. Karen's face was frozen in an awkward mix of shock and frustration. She had been so sure of herself, so certain she had caught someone in the act. But now, with James standing in his open doorway, the truth was undeniable. James turned to the officers. Are we done here? The male officer cleared his throat. Everything checks out. You're free to go. James let out a slow breath. Asterisk asterisk free to go asterisk asterisk like he had ever been anything but. Karen, however, wasn't ready to back down. Wait, she blurted out, her voice shaky but still laced with defiance. If you really live here, where's your proof of purchase? Just because you have a key doesn't mean. The female officer turned to her sharply. Ma'am, that's enough. Karen flinched but didn't say anything. She was still searching for a way to justify what she had done. James could feel the heat rising in his chest, but before he could say anything, another voice cut through the tense silence. What the hell is going on here? Everyone turned. A middle-aged man in a crisp button-up stood on the sidewalk, confusion written all over his face. His eyes moved from Karen to James to the police car, trying to piece together the situation. Karen's face lit up with relief. Greg. Oh, thank God. Tell them. James frowned. Tell them asterisk asterisk what asterisk asterisk. Karen ignored him, turning fully to Greg now. I thought something was wrong. I saw him pull up in that expensive car, and he. She stopped short, realizing the man's expression had changed. He looked at James, then at the house, then back at James. A slow realization crossed his face. You're the one who bought the house, Greg asked. James nodded, his patience running thin. Yeah, signed the papers last month. Just moved in today. Greg let out a short laugh, not mocking, just in disbelief. He shook his head, rubbing a hand over his face. Wow, I had no idea. I've been out of town for work, but the sellers told me a young couple was moving in. James nodded again. My fiancée will be here tomorrow. She's finishing up packing at our old place. Greg exhaled, then turned to Karen. And this time, his expression wasn't confused. It was cold. Karen, he said, voice firm, asterisk asterisk, he asterisk asterisk is my new neighbor. Karen's mouth fell open. What? No, but Greg didn't let her finish. So let me get this straight. You saw a black man in a nice car and assumed he was a criminal, and then you called the cops on him. Karen swallowed hard. I was just looking out for the neighborhood. Greg's face darkened. No, you were looking for a problem that didn't exist.